In the freezing dark, she clutched her newborn tight, praying the howls would pass her by. But it was a dog's bark that pierced the night and changed everything. Why would a lone cowboy follow that sound into the wilderness? And what did he find waiting in the snow? December 1889, and the Wyoming Territory is locked in the grip of the harshest winter anyone can remember. Snow lies 3 feet deep across the endless prairie, and the wind howls like the voices of 1,000 ghosts seeking vengeance. In a ramshackle cabin at the edge of civilization, Colt Ellery sits by his dying fire, nursing a bottle of whiskey and trying to forget the faces that haunt his dreams. He's 35 years old but looks 50, weathered by war, broken by loss, and hardened by 8 years of self-imposed exile in this God-forsaken wilderness. His only companion is a mangy, half-wild cattle dog named Whistle, a scarred, yellow-eyed beast that's more wolf than pet. The dog earned his name not from any melodious sound, but from the sharp whistle of wind through a bullet hole in his left ear, courtesy of a cattle rustler who didn't live to regret his poor aim. Whistle have exactly 2 modes, sleeping and biting. He's never shown affection, never wagged his tail, and certainly never barked without good reason. Which is why, when he suddenly bolts upright at midnight and starts howling like the devil himself is scratching at the door, Colt knows something is terribly wrong. "What's got into you, you mangy cur?" Colt mutters, but Whistle is already at the door, clawing at the wood with desperate urgency. The dog's entire body trembles with an intensity Colt has never seen before. Then Whistle does something that makes Colt's blood freeze. He barks. Not just once, but a series of sharp, frantic barks that cut through the winter night like gunshots. In 8 years together, Colt has never heard this dog make a sound. All right, Colt growls, grabbing his Winchester and his worn cavalry coat. "But if this is about another rabbit, I'm trading you to the first Comanche I see." Outside, Whistle races toward the tree line like a creature possessed, stopping every few yards to look back and bark again, clearly expecting Colt to follow. The snow is coming down harder now, and visibility is maybe 20 feet in any direction. Every instinct Colt has developed during his years as an Army scout is screaming danger. But Whistle's desperation is infectious. The dog has never led him astray before, and despite his gruff exterior, Colt trusts the animal's instincts more than he trusts most humans. He saddles his horse, checks his rifle, and follows the dog into the darkness. They ride for nearly an hour through the storm, Whistle somehow maintaining direction despite the swirling snow and howling wind. Colt's hands are numb inside his gloves, and ice crystals form on his mustache with every breath. He's about to turn back when Whistle suddenly stops dead, hackles raised, staring into a grove of skeletal pine trees. That's when Colt sees it, a sight that will haunt him for the rest of his days. If this opening rattled you, drop a comment below. It only gets more intense from here. Tied to the largest pine tree, barely visible through the swirling snow, is a woman. Her dress is torn and bloody, her dark hair hangs in frozen tangled around her face, and her wrists are raw and bleeding from the ropes that bind her to the trunk. Above her head, nailed to the tree with crude iron spikes, is a hand-painted sign that makes Colt's stomach turn. She's nothing. Wolves can have her. But it's the bundle at her feet that stops Colt's heart entirely. Wrapped in what was once a white shawl, now stained dark with blood and dirt, is a baby. The child is crying, a thin, desperate wail that somehow cuts through the storm and the wind and every defensive wall Colt has built around his heart. "Jesus Christ," Colt whispers, dismounting so fast he nearly loses his footing in the deep snow. His hands shake, not from the cold, but from rage so pure and hot it threatens to consume him entirely. The woman's eyes flutter open as Colt approaches, and for a moment they focus on him with desperate hope. Her lips are blue with cold, and when she tries to speak, only a cracked whisper emerges. "Please, my baby." Colt draws his knife and cuts the ropes with quick, efficient movements, the same way he once freed captured soldiers from Confederate lines. The woman collapses into his arms, barely conscious, her body racked with violent shivers. She's been out here for hours, maybe longer, and the fact that she's still alive is nothing short of miraculous. The baby's cries have grown weaker, more desperate. Colt scoops up the child, a girl he realizes, maybe 8 months old, and is shocked by how fine her clothes are underneath the blood and grime. This isn't some settler's child, the delicate lace on her dress, the quality of the fabric. This baby came from money. Using skills learned during his cavalry days, Colt fashions a makeshift sling from his coat and secures both mother and child against his chest. The woman is dead weight in his arms, her breathing shallow and labored, but she's alive. That has to be enough for now. As he lifts them both onto his horse, a sound drifts through the trees that makes his blood run cold. The low, haunting howl of wolves. Not far, maybe a mile, maybe less. In this storm, with the scent of blood in the air, they'll be here soon. Whistle positions himself between the tree line and Colt's horse, every muscle tense, ready to fight. The dog might be half wild, but he understands what's at stake. "Come on, boy," Colt calls, spurring his horse toward home. "Time to go." As they race through the storm, Colt's mind churns with questions that have no good answers. Who would do this to a woman and child? What kind of monster leaves people to die in the wilderness, like discarded trash? And why does something about this whole situation feel familiar, like a nightmare he's had before, but can't quite remember? The howls grow closer. By the time they reach Colt's cabin, the woman is burning with fever so intense he can feel the heat radiating from her body even through his thick coat. Her breathing is rapid and shallow, and she hasn't opened her eyes since he cut her down from that tree. The baby has stopped crying but seems listless, her tiny fingers frighteningly cold, despite being bundled against Colt's chest. Colt opens his cabin door and immediately begins the familiar routine of treating serious illness. Skills learned during too many battlefield surgeries when proper doctors were nowhere to be found. He strips the wet, frozen clothes from both mother and child, wrapping them in every blanket he owns before building up the fire until the small cabin blazes with heat. The woman's injuries are extensive but not immediately life-threatening. Rope burns on her wrists, bruising on her face and arms, a gash on her scalp that stopped bleeding but needs cleaning. More concerning is the fever that's making her delirious, causing her to mumble incoherently and thrash against the blankets. The baby, miraculously, seems largely unharmed, hungry, cold, and frightened, but alive. Her dress, now that Colt can't see it clearly, is made of the finest silk, with intricate embroidery that speaks of serious wealth. Around her tiny neck is a gold locket bearing the initial H. Whistle, who has never shown interest in anything beyond food and sleep, takes up position beside the baby's makeshift bed and refuses to move. The scarred dog lies with his massive head resting protectively near the child's feet, yellow eyes alert and watchful. Working by lamplight, Colt brews pine bark tea, an old army remedy for fever, and begins the delicate process of getting small sips of liquid into the unconscious woman. Her dark hair is matted with blood and ice, but underneath the grime he can see she's young, maybe 25, with fine features that suggest she's never known hard labor or rough living. "Who are you?" he whispers as he bathes the cuts on her face with warm water. "And who did this to you?" As if summoned by his question, the woman's eyes suddenly snap open. They're green, the deep, startling green of summer grass, and filled with terror so raw it makes Colt's chest tighten. "Colburn," she whispers, her voice barely audible but loaded with such hatred that Colt actually flinches. He said the wolves could have what he couldn't break." The name hits Colt like a physical blow. Colonel Marcus Colburn, a name from his past that he spent 8 years trying to forget. The same Marcus Colburn who got half of Colt's unit killed at Antietam through reckless grandstanding. The same Colburn who valued his own glory more than his soldiers' lives. "Colburn," Colt repeats, his voice barely controlled. "Marcus Colburn?" The woman's eyes focus on him with desperate intensity. "You know him?" "I know him." Colt's hands clenched into fists. "That son of a bitch is supposed to be dead." The woman's name is Mercy Langtree, and her story unfolds over the next 2 days as her fever breaks and strength slowly returns. It's a tale that makes Colt's blood boil with every word, a story of cruelty so calculated and deliberate that it redefines his understanding of human evil. Mercy had been a mail-order bride, responding to advertisements placed by a successful rancher and former military officer, seeking a refined woman for companionship and marriage. The letters had been charming, romantic even, painting pictures of a comfortable life in the growing town of Cheyenne. The man signing them as M. Colburn had seemed educated, gentle, and genuinely interested in building a life together. The reality was a nightmare beyond anything Mercy could have imagined. He didn't want a wife, she tells Colt, her voice hollow as she stares into the fire. He wanted property, something beautiful to own, to display, to break when the mood struck him. The marriage ceremony was a sham, just him and two of his men in some abandoned church. No legal documents, no witnesses who couldn't be bought or threatened. The baby, whose name is Hope, isn't Colburn's child. She's Mercy's daughter from a brief, happy marriage to a young doctor who died of typhoid fever the previous year. Mercy had been desperate, alone and grieving, when she responded to Colburn's advertisement. She thought she was giving her daughter a chance at a better life. Instead, she delivered them both into hell. He liked hurting me, Mercy continues, her hands trembling as she holds baby Hope. But what he really enjoyed was threatening Hope. He'd hold her over the stairs or near the fire or out the window of his second-story office. He said if I ever tried to leave, if I ever told anyone what was happening, he'd make sure Hope died slowly while I watched. Colt's jaw works as he listens. His hands clenched so tightly his knuckles have gone white. He's seen cruelty before. War has a way of bringing out the worst in men, but this calculated torture of a woman and child strikes him as something beyond normal human evil. When I finally tried to run, Mercy says, he was ready for me. It was like he'd been waiting, planning what he'd do. His men caught us before we'd gone 5 miles. That's when he said he was tired of trying to train a stubborn dog, and maybe the wolves would have better luck breaking me. She looks up at Colt, and he sees not just fear in her green eyes, but a fierce, burning determination that matches his own. He tied me to that tree and left Hope at my feet, where I could watch her freeze to death. He said he'd come back in a week to collect whatever was left, just to see if the wolves had taught me proper obedience. Colt stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. The rage building inside him is familiar. The same cold fury that made him legendary among Confederate forces, the same deadly calm that earned him the nickname, the Ghost of Antietam. He's not coming back in a week, Colt says quietly, because he's going to be dead long before then. Mercy catches his arm as he reaches for his gun belt. You don't understand. He has men, money, connections. He was a decorated officer. People believe him when he talks. If you go after him, he'll destroy you. Colt looks down at her with eyes that have seen too much death to fear it anymore. Ma'am, Marcus Colburn destroyed me 8 years ago when he got my entire unit killed for his own glory. The only difference is, this time I'm choosing the fight. Dawn breaks cold and clear as Colt prepares to ride out. His Winchester cleaned and loaded, his cavalry saber sharp enough to shave with. Mercy watches from the cabin window, holding Hope close, her face a mask of fear and resignation. She's seen what Colburn's men can do, and despite Colt's confident words, she knows he's riding toward almost certain death. But Colt isn't planning to face 3 armed men in open combat. He's a scout, trained in tracking and stealth, and the men who left Mercy to die have made crucial mistakes. They assumed she'd be dead within hours, so they didn't bother covering their trail. In the fresh snow, their tracks might as well be highway signs pointing directly to their location. Whistle accompanies him part way, but Colt sends the dog back when they reach the tree line. Stay with the women, he commands, and somehow the scarred animal seems to understand. This isn't a hunting game. This is war, and dogs don't belong in war. The tracks lead northeast toward a series of rocky canyons that Colt knows well from his years of solitude. It's a rough country, full of hidden ravines and blind corners, perfect for an ambush if you know the terrain. The men he's tracking clearly don't. Their trail leads to an abandoned mining camp nestled in a narrow canyon, its wooden buildings weathered gray by wind and time. Smoke rises from one of the structures, and Colt can see horses tethered outside. 3 horses, just as he expected. From his concealed position on the canyon rim, Colt studies the camp through his field glasses. The men are relaxed, confident, probably congratulating themselves on a job well done. One sits outside cleaning his rifle, a red bandana tied around his neck. Another limps as he tends the horses, favoring his left leg. The third is barely visible through a window, but Colt catches glimpses of movement inside the main building. These aren't professional soldiers or experienced outlaws. They're hired thugs, the kind of men Colburn would recruit for jobs that required cruelty rather than skill. That makes them dangerous in their unpredictability, but it also makes them sloppy. Colt spends the rest of the morning watching, learning their routines, identifying their weaknesses. The man with the limp clearly has an old injury that slows him down. Red bandana is left-handed but keeps his pistol on his right hip, a cross-draw that will cost him precious seconds in a gunfight. The one inside seems to be the leader, giving orders and making decisions. As the sun reaches its peak, Colt begins his descent into the canyon. He moves like smoke between the rocks, every step calculated, every sound measured. This is what he was born for, the patient, methodical application of violence in service of justice. The war might have ended 8 years ago, but for Colt Ellery, this particular battle is just beginning. He's no longer just a broken-down ex-scout drinking alone in a cabin. Today, he's the ghost of Antietam, and these men are about to learn why Confederate soldiers used to whisper his name around their campfires. The first man dies without ever knowing Colt was there. The man with the red bandana dies with Colt's knife between his ribs, his final breath a soft wheeze that barely disturbs the afternoon stillness. Colt drags the body behind a pile of mining equipment, positioning it where the others won't immediately notice its absence. 1 down, 2 to go. The canyon works in Colt's favor. Its narrow walls and scattered buildings create a maze of shadows and blind spots that he navigates with the fluid grace of a predator. Every rock, every wooden beam, every rusted piece of machinery becomes part of his tactical advantage. The man with the limp is next, caught in the open while watering the horses. He looks up at the wrong moment and sees death approaching in the form of a grim-faced ex-cavalryman emerging from behind a dilapidated shed. The man's hand drops toward his gun, but Colt's Colt Navy revolver clears leather with the speed of long practice. The gunshot echoes off the canyon walls like thunder, and the man with the limp crumples into the dirt, his unfired weapon spinning away across the frozen ground. "Tommy?" calls a voice from inside the main building. "Are you shooting at shadows again?" Colt presses himself against the outer wall of the structure, listening to footsteps approach the door. This one, the leader, is going to be more careful, more dangerous. Through a crack in the wooden boards, Colt can see him checking his weapons, moving with the deliberate caution of someone who's survived previous gunfights. The door opens slowly and the man steps out with his rifle raised, scanning the canyon for threats. He's older than the others, maybe 40, with graying hair and the kind of scars that come from years of hard living. His eyes are intelligent, calculating, and when he spots Tommy's body lying near the horses, he doesn't panic. "Well, well," the man says conversationally, though his voice carries an edge of tension. "Looks like we got ourselves a visitor. You know, friends Tommy and Jake weren't much to look at, but they were mine. That makes this personal." Colt steps out from behind the building, his rifle steady, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Personal?" he asked quietly. "You want to talk about personal things? You left a woman and baby tied to a tree to die. You did it for money, for fun, because some rich bastard told you to. That's what I call personal." Recognition dawns in the man's eyes, followed immediately by fear. "You're him," he breathes. "The ghost from Antietam. Sweet Jesus, Colburn said you were dead." "Colburn says a lot of things," Colt replies. "Most of them lie. But here's something true. You're about to join your friends in hell." The gunfight that follows lasts exactly 3 seconds. The man is fast, experienced, and desperate. But Colt has spent 8 years perfecting his skills in solitude, and desperation is no match for cold, methodical precision. When the smoke clears, Colt stands alone in the abandoned mining camp, surrounded by the bodies of 3 men who learned too late that some debts can only be paid in blood. But even as he searches their belongings for anything that might lead him to Colburn, he knows this is just the beginning. These men were expendable pawns, easily replaced. Colburn himself is the real target, and he won't be caught off guard in some forgotten canyon. He'll be surrounded by more men, better men, in a place of his own choosing. But that's fine with Colt. He's waited 8 years for this confrontation, and he's willing to wait a little longer to do it right. The journey north toward the Montana border takes 5 days through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the Wyoming Territory. Colt leads them along forgotten trails and hidden valleys, paths known only to scouts and outlaws, staying well clear of established roads where Colburn's men might be waiting. Mercy proves tougher than her refined appearance suggests. Despite everything she's endured, she never complains about the harsh conditions, the cold nights, or the constant threat of pursuit. She rides with baby Hope secured against her chest in an improvised sling, singing soft lullabies that seem to calm not just the child, but the entire landscape around them. It's during these long hours of travel that the walls between Colt and Mercy begin to crumble. The necessities of survival, sharing warmth, rationing food, taking turns standing watch, create an intimacy that neither of them expected or entirely welcomed. "You don't have to do this," Mercy tells him on the third night as they huddle around a small fire hidden deep in a rocky ravine. "The Quaker mission in Montana will take us in, give us sanctuary. You could just leave us there and disappear again. Colburn would never find you." Colt stares into the flames, his weathered face a map of old pain and newer purpose. "I tried disappearing once," he says quietly. "Spent 8 years hiding in that cabin, drinking myself to death one bottle at a time. Didn't work out so well." "What happened?" Mercy asks. "During the war, I mean. What did Colburn do to you?" For a long moment, Colt doesn't answer. Then slowly he begins to speak. The first time in years he's told anyone about Antietam. "Colburn was our commanding officer, good at speeches, terrible at tactics. September 17th, 1862, he decided he was going to win the war single-handed by charging a Confederate position that every scout in the unit said was suicide. I tried to tell him it was a trap, that we were outnumbered 3-1 and walking into enfilading fire." Colt's hands clench around his coffee cup. "He called me a coward in front of the entire company. Said if I didn't have the stomach for real fighting, maybe I should transfer to the Supply Corps. Then he ordered the charge anyway." "What happened?" "Exactly what I said would happen. We lost 47 men in about 10 minutes. Good men, friends, soldiers who trusted their officers to keep them alive. Colburn got a medal for it. Gallant leadership under fire. I got transferred to reconnaissance, where I couldn't second-guess his brilliant strategies anymore." Mercy reaches across the fire and touches his hand, her fingers warm against his cold skin. "It wasn't your fault," she says softly. "Wasn't it?" Colt looks up at her, his eyes haunted. "I knew it was wrong. I knew those men were going to die, but I followed orders anyway, because that's what soldiers do. Maybe if I'd refused, stood up to him publicly, some of those boys would still be alive. And maybe you'd have been court-martialed and shot, and they'd have died anyway," Mercy counters. "You can't save everyone, Colt. Sometimes the best you can do is save who you can." As if summoned by her words, baby Hope chooses that moment to wake up and smile at Colt. The first real smile he's seen from her since the rescue. Something inside his chest, something that's been frozen for 8 years, begins to thaw. "Her name is Hope," Mercy says, noticing his expression. "Seems appropriate, doesn't it?" The town of Cedar Falls, Montana Territory, appears peaceful enough as they ride down the main street on a crisp morning in early January. It's a prosperous settlement, grown fat on silver mining and cattle ranching, with wide streets and sturdy buildings that speak of confidence in the future. The kind of place where a man like Marcus Colburn could buy respectability with enough gold and the right stories, which is exactly what he's done. Colt spots him through the window of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Older now, graying at the temples, but still carrying himself with the arrogant bearing of a man who's never faced real consequences for his actions. He's holding court at a corner table, regaling a group of local businessmen with what are undoubtedly heroic tales of his military service. "He's here," Colt tells Mercy as they pause outside the general store. "Question is, how do we handle this without getting innocent people killed?" But even as he speaks, Colt can see that the decision is being taken out of his hands. Colburn has spotted them through the window, and his face cycles through surprise, recognition, and calculation in the space of a heartbeat. He's already moving, already planning, already turning the situation to his advantage. By the time Colt and Mercy enter the saloon, Colburn has transformed himself into a picture of concerned authority. He stands as they approach, his face a mask of sympathetic relief, every inch the worried gentleman who's finally found his missing wife and child. "Mercy, my dear," he says loudly enough for the entire saloon to hear. "Thank God you're safe. When you disappeared with little hope, I feared the worst. The entire territory has been searching for you." The performance is masterful. To the casual observer, Colburn appears to be a loving husband reunited with his family after a terrible ordeal. His voice carries just the right note of concern, his posture suggests protective strength, and his eyes glisten with what might pass for tears of relief. But Colt has seen this act before. During the war, Colburn was equally skilled at presenting himself as the hero of every story, the misunderstood commander doing his best in impossible circumstances. It's a talent that served him well in civilian life. "I'm afraid my wife has been unwell," Colburn continues, his tone suggesting delicate mental health issues that require careful handling. "The birth was difficult, and the frontier can be so isolating for a woman of her refined background. Sometimes she becomes confused, imagining threats where none exist." The local men nod sympathetically. They've seen it before. Frontier wives who crack under the pressure of isolation and hardship, who run off into the wilderness with their children during mental episodes. It's a plausible story, made more convincing by Colburn's obvious relief and concern. Mercy stands frozen, hope clutched protectively against her chest, her face pale with the realization that Colburn has once again turned her desperate situation to his advantage. Who will believe her word against his? Who will take the testimony of a mentally unstable woman over that of a decorated war hero? But then Colt steps forward, and his voice cuts through Colburn's performance like a blade through silk. "Marcus," he says quietly, his tone carrying 8 years of accumulated hatred. "Been a while." Colburn's mask slips for just an instant, long enough for Colt to see the fear underneath. Then it's back in place, though not quite as convincing as before. "I'm sorry," Colburn says carefully. "Do we know each other?" Colt smiles, and there's no warmth in it at all. Antietam, September 17th, 1862. 47 dead men would know each other if they could speak. The temperature in the saloon seems to drop 10 degrees. The silence that follows Colt's words stretches like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Every man in the saloon understands that they're witnessing something far more dangerous than a simple domestic dispute. This is about old debts, wartime blood, and the kind of justice that can't be settled in courtrooms. Colburn recovers quickly, his politician's smile never wavering. "Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This man appears to be suffering from some sort of battlefield trauma." "The only trauma," Colt interrupts, his voice deadly quiet, "is watching good men die because their commanding officer valued his own glory more than their lives." The accusation hangs in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Several of the local men shift uncomfortably. Many of them are veterans themselves, and they understand the weight of such charges. Others begin backing toward the door, sensing violence in the air like animals before a storm. Colburn's mask finally drops completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Very well," he says, his hand drifting toward the ivory-handled Colt at his hip. "If you insist on making this personal, perhaps we should settle it like gentlemen." "Outside," but Colt shakes his head. "No dueling code, no gentleman's rules. You forfeited those when you left a woman and baby to die in the wilderness. You can't prove." "I don't need to prove anything," Colt cuts him off. "I just need to send you to hell. The gunfight that follows will be talked about in Cedar Falls for the next 50 years. Both men are fast, both are experienced, and both have everything to lose. But where Colburn fights with the desperation of a cornered animal, Colt moves with the cold precision of a man who's already dead inside and has nothing left to fear." Colburn's first shot goes wide, rushed by panic and 8 years of soft living. Colt's bullet takes him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his second shot into the ceiling. The saloon erupts in chaos as patrons dive for cover behind overturned tables and scattered chairs. But before Colt could finish what he started, 3 more men burst through the saloon's back door. Colburn's bodyguards drawn by the gunfire. The odds shift dramatically as rifles join the pistol fight, filling the air with lead and splinters. Colt takes a bullet in his side but keeps moving, using the chaos and confusion to his advantage. This is what he was trained for, fighting outnumbered in confined spaces, turning the environment into a weapon. A whiskey bottle becomes a club. An overturned table becomes cover. Even the brass spittoon becomes ammunition when hurled with enough force. Through it all, Mercy crouches behind the bar with Hope, her face pale but determined. When one of Colburn's men gets too close, threatening to use her as a human shield, she proves that desperation can make anyone dangerous. The derringer she's carried hidden in her dress, a final gift from her dead husband, speaks with authority when pressed against the man's temple. In the end, Whistle tips the balance. The scarred dog appears from nowhere, having tracked them across half the territory, and launches himself at Colburn just as the man lines up a killing shot on the wounded Colt. 60 pounds of snarling fury drives Colburn to the floor, giving Mercy the opening she needs to grab Colt's fallen rifle. Her hands shake as she raises the weapon, but her voice is steady as steel. "This is for every woman you've hurt," she says, "for every child you've threatened, for every person whose trust you've betrayed." The rifle shot echoes through the destroyed saloon like the voice of justice itself. Spring comes early to the Montana Territory that year, as if the land itself is eager to wash away the memories of winter's violence. Snow melts into rushing streams that carry the last traces of blood down from the mountains, and the first green shoots begin pushing through the dark earth around Colt's cabin. The cabin itself has changed. Where once it housed only a bitter, broken man and his scarred dog, it now rings with the sounds of life. Hope's delighted laughter as she takes her first wobbling steps, Mercy's soft humming as she tends the garden they planted together. Even Whistle's occasional contented rumble as he lies in the sunshine, with the baby curled against his massive side. Colt moves more slowly now, the bullet wound in his side having left him with a permanent reminder of that day in Cedar Falls. But there's peace in his movements, a sense of purpose that's been missing for 8 years. He's no longer running from his past. He's building toward a future. The legal complications that followed Colburn's death had been surprisingly minimal. 3 witnesses testified that Colburn had drawn first, that his men had opened fire on an unarmed woman and child, that the entire confrontation had been instigated by his attempts to reclaim property that had never legally belonged to him. The territorial authorities, faced with overwhelming evidence of Colburn's crimes and a growing stack of similar complaints from other women, had been happy to close the case without further investigation. Mercy stays not because she has to, but because she wants to. The papers that make her Colt's wife in the eyes of the law were signed by a genuine preacher in a real church, with real witnesses who couldn't be bought or threatened. But more important than legal documents is the quiet understanding that's grown between them. 2 broken people who found completeness in each other's company. "What do you think?" Mercy asked one evening as they sit on the newly built porch, watching Hope play with a wooden doll that Colt carved for her. "Should we expand the garden this year? Maybe add some of those sunflowers I saw growing wild near the creek?" Colt considers the question seriously, as he does all of Mercy's suggestions. "Sunflowers sound good," he agrees. Sarah always loved sunflowers, said they reminded her of faces turned toward the light. It's the first time he's mentioned his daughter from the war, the little girl whose death had sent him into 8 years of exile. But instead of the familiar stab of guilt and pain, he feels something lighter. Not forgetting, never that, but perhaps accepting. She would have liked Hope, Mercy says quietly, and Hope would have loved having an older sister to look up to. Colt nods, watching as his adopted daughter toddles across the porch with her arms outstretched for balance. In her bright eyes and determined expression, he sees not a replacement for what he lost, but a new chance to get things right. Whistle lifts his grizzled head from where he's been dozing in the afternoon sun, ears pricked at some distant sound that only he can hear. For a moment, Colt tenses. Old habits die hard, and survival instincts don't fade overnight. But then the dog relaxes, settling back into his comfortable sprawl, and Colt realizes the sound is just wind through the pines. The evening light catches Hope's hair as she finally makes it across the porch and throws herself into Colt's arms with the absolute trust that only children possess. He lifts her up, marveling at how much she's grown, how much stronger and more confident she's become in the months since that terrible night in the snow. "Papa," she says clearly, one of her first real words, and one that never fails to make Colt's throat tight with emotion. "That's right, little one," he whispers, holding her close. "Papa's here. Papa's always going to be here." As the sun sets behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Colt reflects on the strange turns that life can take. 6 months ago, he was a broken man drinking himself to death in isolation, convinced that his failures had destroyed any chance of redemption. Now he's a husband, a father, and something he never thought he'd be again, a man with hope for the future. "She was left for the wolves," he says quietly, more to himself than to Mercy. But the wolves met something fiercer that night. Mercy looks at him questioningly, and he explains. "A man with nothing left to lose, and a dog who still believed in saving someone." From somewhere in the distance comes the sound of actual wolves calling to each other in the growing darkness. Wild, free, and no longer a threat to anyone under this roof. They're just part of the wilderness now, part of the natural world that surrounds but no longer menaces this small pocket of civilization. Inside the cabin, warmth and light wait. Outside, the vast Montana territory stretches endlessly under a canopy of stars. And here on the porch, 3 people and 1 scarred dog have found something precious and rare. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, courage, and the unshakable belief that sometimes the most broken people make the strongest bonds. The wolves can howl all they want. This pack is complete. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.